Good to see you in the house of the Lord this morning. Page number 167 as we open up the Sunday School Hour. Number 167, we'll do the first and last verses of Joy Unspeakable. 167, if you'll stand, please. I have found His grace is all complete. He supplieth every need. While I sit and learn at Jesus' feet, I am free, yes, free indeed. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. All the half has never yet been told. I have found the joy no tongue can tell, how its waves of glory roll. It is like a great o'erflowing well springing up within my soul. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory, full of glory. It is joy unspeakable and full of glory. Oh, the half has never yet been told. You may be seated.
Good morning. Good to see everybody in the house of the Lord this morning on a beautiful Sunday morning. It's a beautiful, crisp morning out there. I'm loving this cooler weather. I can't say I don't like the warmer weather, but I like this kind of weather right here. If it stayed like this year round, I'd be happy. But if anybody's had a birthday or wedding anniversary this past week, y'all come forward.
Happy birthday to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy birthday, may God bless you. Happy anniversary to you.
All right, a couple of announcements. Next month, October, we will have 5 Sundays in that month. There will be a sign-up sheet put on the table tonight. If you youth will sign up to teach, which we'll appreciate it. And as far as I know, we'll be going back into the classrooms next Sunday unless anything changes. But the adults will meet out here. The young people will go down to the fellowship building today. So that's the announcement we have. 3 John, something that I heard a lot of this week. I was in court all week and got to hear the word testimony given over and over and over again. And the people that would come to testify, they would, when they got up there, they would have to raise their right hand. They promised to tell the testimony that you're about to give. Is it the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And they would say, I do, and they would ask them the questions then. But what I was getting at, the word testimony, that's something that we live with each and every day, something that we do each and every day. How's our testimony? What is it? The importance of having a good testimony. And here in 3 John, there's 3 men in 3 John here that are talked about here. Gaius, Diotrephes, and Demetrius. 2 of them had a good report. 2 of them had a good testimony, but 1 did not. But we see here, this was a short epistle that John wrote to the leaders of local assembly, the local church here. But one of these men I'm going to talk about this morning is Gaius, whom the apostle dearly loved. He called him well beloved, probably one of his converts. He had some great personal qualities. One of them was he had a good report. Men came to John and told him the good report about Gaius, that he was an encourager. He was one who, tried to encourage the people in the church, even though there were some problems going on during that time. But, you and I ought to be encouragers. In this day and time that we're living in, we need some encouragement from day to day. It's not easy out here in this world today, trying to live a Christian life, trying to go on for the Lord. It's not easy because we have the world, the flesh, the devil that we have to put up with each and every day. But he was an encourager. But as we read here about Gaius, he wasn't in the best of health. He had some kind of health problems, but he was in bad health physically, but there's nothing wrong with his health spiritually. And he was spiritually healthy here. But it says Gaius has a good testimony. In verse 3 through 5, for I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers. We see here that he was a glowing example of Christ. He was what a Christian ought to be, not only to the brethren that were in the church, but to strangers, people who came in. He welcomed in people who came to visit the church and try to, encourage them. But what made Gaius such a good testimony? It says he had God's truth in him. And you and I, the truth was in him that enabled him to walk in obedience to God's will. And you and I, as Christians, our testimony ought to be that the truth is in us. We see here he had read the Word, he meditated upon it, he delighted in it, but he practiced it each and every day that he lived. We see that he was not only encouragement to the brethren, but the strangers, as I said before. But what is a testimony? It's an evidence or a declaration or proof provided by the existence or appearance of something which should be a proof of our faith in God. That's our testimony. It's something in our life where our life and God intersected. God saved us by His marvelous grace and mercy, and a testimony, something that it takes us a lifetime to build up, but in just a few seconds can be torn down, can be ruined. We see our testimony is a powerful tool in sharing what God has done for us and is doing for us in our lives today. It's important for us to realize the power and the value of a good testimony, to live each and every day, not just on Sunday, not just on Wednesday, but Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Every day, our walk, our talk, whatever we do, let our light shine and live a clean, victorious life. Be an encouragement to others. Just what people sees in us, a smile out of us, a encouraging word. Just, if nothing else, holding the door open for somebody. People think, well, you don't see that much anymore, But just doing the little simple things, being a testimony there, will let our light shine before all men. We see our daily walk and our talk says everything about us. What people sees in us here on Sunday, they ought to see throughout our work days. Every day that we live, we ought to be the same. Do we have a good report, a good testimony like Gaius, it was said of him here? Are we the evidence that we're walking in the truth? How important our testimony is today. Let's all stand to be dismissed to Sunday school. I'm ask Brother Joe Cawthon if he'll lead us in prayer, please.
While they're coming around, just to let you know, Jordan's taking up the offerings for the women's class. Grant will be taking it up for the men's class. So you can grab them 20s out now. Or ones. All right, thank you all for being here this morning. I hope and trust that you've all had a good week. We'll be back in the book of Esther. I'm just teaching once a month this year, and the Lord kind of directed me to go to the book of Esther. And last month we looked at chapter 1 a little bit. This month, I guess, but this morning we were going to look into chapter number 2. And Esther being a book of providence. I don't know, I guess in the times we're in the times that we live in, I guess it wouldn't hurt for us all to have a little better understanding of the providence of God, because we have so many questions, and there's just so many uncertainties in life, and there's just so many why this or why that, and it just seems like the times we're kind of on shaky ground. But remember, God's in control. He's got this thing. He's got it. We can't understand everything the Lord does. We can't comprehend it. It's beyond our comprehension. But He's got a plan. So a little quick review. I know several, especially, the ladies weren't there last month, but some general notes on Esther. You'll look through the book of Esther, and the name of God is not mentioned. Nowhere in the book of Esther do you see God, the Lord? It's just the Spirit. It's not mentioned. It's not mentioned. There's no reference to prayer in the book of Esther. Esther really is never mentioned in the New Testament as well. It's only one of 2 books in the Bible that was named after a woman, Ruth being the other. And Ruth was a book of redemption, while Esther is a book of providence. Providence is the theme of this book. And again, I think it would do us all well to realize, especially the times that we're in, God's providence. God's working behind the scenes. And there's so many definitions for providence. Man, once you start looking, a lot of good ones. I found these, and I mentioned these last month, but I'll mention these again just as a kind of a way of introduction. Providence. Providence is defined as the means by which God directs all things, both animate and inanimate, seen and unseen, good and evil, towards a worthy purpose. He's moving behind the scenes. Providence is like a needle that sews through the free will of man. Providence is God standing in the shadows. He's there, but you just can't see him. Providence is God's intervention in our lives or divine circumstances. Providence is the hand of God in the glove of human events. And what fits our lesson this morning, J. Vernon McGee said, he defines it as providence is the way God leads the man who will not be led. You think about it in your times, whether maybe you were out in rebellion or sin or maybe lost, a man that wouldn't be led, but the providence of God's working behind the scenes to get you maybe where you need to be. God's providence. God's providence. He's in control. I just want to reemphasize this morning, God's in control. Nothing shook him up. He's not nervous. He's not looking down on this thing thinking, boy, what's my next move? What am I going to do now? It's all part of the big plan. It's all part of his plan. So in chapter 1, the story began with the king having a year-long feast, and basically he had this feast to prepare his governors and princes. They were about to go into war, so basically he tried to get them into a good mood. So he has this year-long feast, and as you go through, there's a couple of feasts he has, and on the second feast, there toward the end of the week, he gets drunk. The king does, Ahasuerus gets drunk, and he calls for his queen. She's a beautiful woman, and he calls for the queen Vashti, and he wants to bring her out in front of the people to show her off. In verse number, in Esther 1 and verse number 11, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king of the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty. Bunch of drunk men, really, what you've got is a bunch of drunk men kind of hooting and hollering, and the king saying, look at my wife, boys. And there's no telling, there's different commentators speculate different things. What she was supposedly wearing, this, that. But the bottom line is, he really disrespected her and was going to bring her out and parade her in front of a bunch of drunk men just to show her beauty off. Okay? So, Vashti says, I'm not going. Verse number 12 says, but the queen Vashti refused to come to the king's command. Well, this was a big problem, especially in that age. You know, in our generation today, if mama says I ain't going to do it, we just kick rocks and go pout. But not back in. Not back in, and not if you're the king. And you're in front of everybody. You're in front of everybody, your servants and everybody that's under your thumb. And she just showed you up. I'll show you. Wait a minute, who's in authority? Wait a minute. So the king, it says in verse number 12 of chapter number 1, therefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. So he gets his counselors and those around him together, and then the question that I highlighted in verse number 15, the question is asked, what shall we do? Boys, what are we going to do about this? Because she just made me look real bad. And these other guys got to thinking about it and said, man, if the queen's going to do this, what about my wife? She's going to look at this and say, well, if the queen can do that to the king, well, I can do it to you. So they said, this isn't a good situation here, man. We need to make an example of her. So they did. They did. They made an example of her. In verse 19, they removed her. Throat's dry, I'm sorry. They removed her. Then they wanted to replace her. They said, well, look, you just write her a bill of divorcement, get rid of her, we'll find another queen. She's not deserving anyway. And then in verse number 20, they reported her. They published a decree throughout the whole empire. We're going to make sure everybody knows about this, that she's not going to get away with such disrespect toward the king. So they thought all this was a good idea. Now, something I want you to see. Look at verse number 3 of chapter 1. The Bible says it was in the 3rd year of his reign when all this happened, okay? I just said that for a point, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, having said that, and kind of having reviewed that, we get into chapter number 2. So, let's go look at chapter 2. I guess what we'll do, I'm going to just read chapter 2, and then I'll come back. I got a few points, but I don't think it'll be very lengthy. Let's read chapter number 2. After these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Now, after these things, basically, we'll see in verse 16, this is 4 years later. And he's come back from war. And they went out to fight against the Greeks, and they got whipped. There's a 4 years of war that was wasteful, and he comes back dejected, all right? So after these things, this is 4 years later. Sorry. When the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Excuse me, Jordan, bring me a piece of chewing gum right there. Huh? Well, I mean, you want to bring it to me in your hand? Make me lap it up like a dog? Nah, just throw me a piece of gum. I'm sorry. pocket. I used to teach with chewing gum all the time, then I quit because I swallowed it mid-sentence. I don't want to do that anymore. All right, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti. Come back home 4 years later, and what's on his mind? The queen. He remembers Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Maybe he's having some second thoughts. Maybe I was too hard on her. She was a good woman. She was a good queen. I always come back home. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. I feel like a preacher. I'm like Brother Mark or somebody now. So the servants take note of the disposition of the king. All right. Verse number 2, then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Look, it's been 4 years. We got to do something to get him picked up. Let's pick his spirits up. Let's go find him a wife. All right. Verse number 3, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. So they've got their little plan hatched up here. Now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew. That's an interesting word there. There's a certain Jew, and we'll come back to that, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. He was a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up, or he raised, Hadassah, that is Esther. It was his uncle's daughter, which would make it his cousin. Okay, it was Mordecai's cousin, probably young little cousin, little girl. He's much older than her. Whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away, verse 7. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, the uncle's daughter, for she had neither father or mother. And the maid, meaning Esther, she was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and the maids unto the best place of the house of women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged that she should not show it. In other words, she's not letting anybody know that she's a Jew. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now when every maid's turn was come to go into the king Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications, a whole year purifying themselves before they could go in front of the king, accompanied with 6 months with oil and myrrh. So ladies, you got 6 months of bath bombs and 6 months of sweet odors, perfume. You're going to get bathed up for 6 months, and then you're going to get 6 months worth of perfume doused on you. And all this for the purifying of women. Verse 13. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Sashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, in that she were called by him. So they would spend a year, and the king would call them up for one night to have his way with her, do whatever he was going to do with her, and the next morning she would leave. She's not going back home to mom and dad. She goes back as one of his concubines. So all these women, some commentators I read, I think there was at least 400 women. So all these women will come and spend their night with the king, but they don't go back home. They're part of his harem, so to speak. They're the concubines that had to stay there. So the one that gets chosen, hey, she's going to be the queen. But the others, their life's kind of over, in a sense that they're set apart just for the king, All right. Verse 13, then thus came every maiden of the king, whatsoever she desired was given unto her to the king's house. In the evening she went, the morrow she returned. The second house, verse 15, now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Haggai and the king's chamberlain, the keeper of women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Remember, we were in the 3rd year in chapter 1. See, we're in the 7th year of his reign now, so there's 4 years have passed by. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all the princes and his servants, Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandments of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. Now a little side story, but it's a real important side story for these 3 verses. Verse 21, in those days while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king, therefore, in Mordecai's name. When inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of Chronicles before the king. Just an interesting little side note. Now, make a few comments. That's chapter 2. First of all, the king remembers in verse number 1. It says, and after these things, when the wrath of king of Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti. He remembered. Again, he's returning from 4 years, been 4 long years at war. He returns, but he comes back, he's defeated. He's no doubt in despair, and apparently he's kind of lonely. And defeat will do that to you. When you go and you're fighting a losing battle, you come back defeated, and he starts thinking about maybe what he used to have. So he remembers Vashti and his decree. Maybe he's second-guessing his decision, thinking maybe I was too harsh on her. I really did love that woman, and I've had to do this and that. But so no doubt the servants see his disposition, and they become a little worried, and they thought, well, we've got to do something. So we go into verse number 2, and the servants reasoning. Well, they needed a plan. They said, man, what are we going to do to pick his spirits up? He's the king. He can't be walking around this sad and this, moping like this. So they needed a plan to revive his spirits. And so they've got it. It's been 4 years. It's time to find him a replacement for Vashti. We've got to find a replacement. Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king in verse number 2. So here, basically what they're going to do is have a beauty contest. And you all women out there, y'all watch The Bachelor, handing out a rose. Here's your first Bachelor show right here. He's sitting in the palace, the big fancy house, and he's got all these women coming here wanting to be his, to be his wife. So I don't know if they got it from there or not. I doubt it. But anyway, a beauty contest. Gather the young virgins to the palace, and they will give them their year for their purification. And again, this thing pleased the king. Then I thought third of all about Mordecai. In Mordecai's recognition that's mentioned up here. There was a certain Jew. You know, one of the definitions of providence was the hand of God in the glove of man. Providence is the hand of God in the glove of men. You know, God arranges or allows events to happen to carry out his greater plan. Things that we don't understand and things that make no sense to us, and we can't reason them, but God allows things to happen for his greater purpose. He's got a greater plan. And in this case, we'll find in the later chapters, it was to save the Jewish race. It was to save his people. You know, you ask yourself, do you think God approved of this beauty pageant? That sounded like anything God would want us to do? A carnal king, it was a carnal pageant. It was just carnality. You think God approves of the king and his lifestyle? In chapter number 1, we saw where he was drunk, he had a temper. You know, he was kind of, hey, he's the king, he's spoiled. I doubt God approves of his lifestyle. I doubt he approves of this little carnal plan to find him a queen. You can even ask, was Mordecai in God's will? To be honest with you, because he was still there in Persia. Ezra done took a lot out. They hadn't had liberty to go back to Israel. Some went, but most stayed. They said, nah, we've done been here 70 years. I'm kind of used to it, and I've set my roots here, and this is kind of home. I don't think I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to just stay right here. Mordecai could have went back, but he didn't. What I'm trying to say is, you can be out of the will of God, and God can still work providence in your life. That's what I'm trying to get to. So God allows many things to happen which he doesn't necessarily approve of. Yet, he'll overrule the intentions of man for a greater purpose. Today, liken it to today. Do you think that the Lord looks down and he's pleased with the White House and our government today? I don't think so. Do you think he's pleased with the Biden administration and their decisions on how they want to handle things? I don't think so. They're contrary to God's word. I don't think so. I don't think he's pleased with it. Is God pleased with our political system? Democrats, Republicans, it's a mess. And they're all so corrupt, they're bought and paid for. Is God pleased with our political system? Do you think that the Lord looks down at America today? Do you think he's pleased with our judicial system? I'd say not. I'd say the scales of justice are not balanced at all. Who appointed you? Well, I'll go that way. You know, it's just, there's no honor, there's no integrity. You know, politicians, there's no statesman anymore. I think it's sad to say, I think a man can go with good intentions and get into politics with good intentions, but if he's going to stay in politics, he can't help it. You get into a web that you can't get out of because it's a money thing. It's a money thing. Where are you going to get your money? So, but yet you think about these things even in our time, going on right now. But do you think the Lord's surprised that Joe Biden got elected? Do you think that the Lord is surprised and it just every day he looks out and waits for the news to come on and say, oh, I can't believe they did this. We're getting more corrupt by the day. I don't think he's waiting on the news to broadcast anything. So nothing's taken him by surprise. I'll tell you again, let me emphasize again, God is in control. Man's free will of immorality and sin and events that happen, God can overrule by using these things for his greater purpose. All right, what's that greater purpose? Well, doesn't the stage have to be set for the rapture of the church? Doesn't the stage have to be set for the second coming? Should these things really come as much of a surprise to us? We're given hints and shadows and some scripture in our Bible enough to let us know. We couldn't handle all of it. We just couldn't handle all of it. We don't know how all this is going to end. We don't know what's going to happen to America. We don't know. But the Lord knows. It's just all part of his plan. So there's some things that happen in our lives that we just don't understand. And it's going to happen to all of us. Some things that happen in your life you just don't understand. I'm going to give you an example. 35 years ago, in October next month, my mother died in a house fire, and she was only 43 years old. She's 43. And I had just turned 21. Now, ma'am, especially at that time, I wasn't saved. But I just don't understand that. And I'm going to tell you 35 years later, I can't tell you that I understand it. I don't know why that had to happen. You know, and at that time, it left me confused. I guess more than anything, it kind of left me numb, just numb. I mean, I got to a point where I was literally just numb. But I didn't understand. I just didn't understand. I had a lot of questions, and boy, I sure had a lot of regrets. I thought, golly, why did I feel like I just took advantage of her? Why couldn't I have been a better son? Why couldn't I have done that if I'd only been there that day? Why couldn't I have done this? Why couldn't I have done that? Boy, I had so many regrets. And like I said, I'll look back on this, and next month it's going to be 35 years. I don't have any answers. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have the answers. I don't know why it had to happen. I can speculate. I know that her death was instrumental in me getting saved just because it gave me an awareness to the church. I had never been around the church, so I saw the generosity firsthand of the men's Sunday school class providing me some clothes and just the generosity of the church at her funeral and that kind of thing. I didn't have any inclination, but again, I was just numb. I mean, Blair would try to talk to me, but it was just kind of in one ear and out the other. I don't have the answers. Like I said, was her death to help me to get saved? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know, you know. I could also say, well, why did you have to, you know, there's other ways you could get saved, something, you know. The bottom line is, I'm not going to know. I don't know, and I'm just not going to know. And I just don't have the answers. But you know what I've learned through time? That's okay. That's okay. I don't have to know everything. I looked at it this way. Something happened to me later in life. And I've learned, I thought, man, I'm only 21 years old, and I don't have my mom. Well, you know what I need to be grateful for? At least I got to spend 21 years with her. You know how many children are born and never know their mother? Maybe a mother gets killed by a drunk driver and leaves those babies. I don't know. Maybe it's just, you know, I'd gotten saved a year after this, and it's probably just the Lord working on me. But I just finally come to the point where, God, I don't know. I don't know why this had to happen. I've got some other things in my life I don't talk about publicly, but I think, why did this have to happen? I don't know the answer. But I just had to come to a point where I just let it go and say, Lord, I don't have the answer, and I've just got to go live my life because I'll know on the other side. I'll know on the other side. So I don't know. But again, being saved is the greatest of all blessings in that now your faith, my faith tells me God's in control. He's got this thing. He works all things for his good. And I've learned through the years to appreciate the memories that I have, but more than appreciate the memories I have, you know what I can do? I rejoice in the hope of eternity. Man, this is just a short time passing. It's just a short time. You know, compared to eternity, what's 35 years? You know, that's a blink of an eye. 35 years seems like has went by in a blink of an eye anyway. Compared to an eternity, we'll understand it all by and by. We just don't know. We just don't know. So, providence. What I'm trying to say, providence. I don't understand. Well, there's a lot of things I don't understand. Lately, there's a lot of things I don't understand. But I just got to trust God's in control. What am I going to do? Don't understand and just go back to the world? What's the world going to do for me? I mean, I had to get saved to get out of that mess. Where am I going to go run to? I believe I'd just soon run back to the house of the Lord and find some strength right here, some hope and some rest. People can do what they want to do. I'll put my lot in God's hands. I'll just go that route. That's the route I want to go. Look at Esther's reception. Boy, this is interesting about Esther. I'll hurry up and get done. Look at verse number 7. Chapter 2, verse number 7. There toward about the middle. The maid was fair and beautiful. Look at verse number 9. The maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. Down the bottom of verse 9, he preferred her. Look at verse 17. The king loved Esther above all women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. Back up to verse 15, the last sentence of verse 15. Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. I thought, boy, this Esther, she's more than just beautiful. She's preferred. She finds favor. And I thought about this. How can we live in this world, in this life? Where's the balance? Where do we find favor with God and man? Can we? Can we find favor with God and man? Or is our life so independent that we can only find favor with God and be spiteful to the world? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there is a balance. I think you can find favor with God and man. And I believe I might be wrong, I believe when Brother Kyle preached the other Sunday morning, he made reference to this in Proverbs 3. I think you did. Proverbs 3, verse 3 and 4. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. According to the Bible, you can have both. You can have favor with God and man. How do you do it? Well, first thing he mentioned was mercy. You know, if you found mercy in your life, and if you're saved, you found mercy in your life. You ought to demonstrate that mercy with a little humility. Ain't nothing worse than a know-it-all. You ever been on a job and you just come across someone who's just a smart aleck, a know-it-all, interrupts you, rude? You're not going to find favor with man with that kind of attitude. But if a man's shown mercy and been shown forgiveness, and you've got a forgiving spirit about you, you'll find favor with man. I didn't know the man, but I've heard nothing of great things of him, and he's married a lot of y'all, and y'all, Garland Sintel. Tell me if I'm wrong, but was that a man that you could say found favor with God and man? Sam Baker, did he not find favor with God and man? There is a balance, and it can be achieved, finding favor with God and man. But you got to do it through mercy and through truth. Exemplify the truth through the Spirit. I need to wrap up and get done, so I'm not going to go to the Esther showed respect. She obeyed Mordecai's command. And then toward the end of Esther, that plot got recorded, which is very important that thing got registered in the book of Chronicles because it's going to come back later in the book. But let me close with this. Speaking of providence. So, it just so happened that the king is looking for a queen. It just so happened that there was a certain Jew. And he just happened to take care and raise his cousin. She just happened to be beautiful and fair and found favor. She just happened to be chosen to enter the king's house. She just happened to find favor with all she interacted with. The king just happened to choose her and chose her to be his queen. She just happened not to mention her heritage, that she was a Jew. Mordecai just happened to hear this plot against the king, and he just happened to tell Esther about it, and she just happened to tell the king about it, and this event just happened to be recorded in the book of Chronicles. Well, did it all just happen? Did it all just happen? See, I think it's bigger than that. It didn't just happen, but it's God's providence. It's God's providence. What I'm trying to leave with you this morning is, look, we don't understand everything. The Lord knows I don't. I'm come to my wits' end over several things, but I can't wrestle that. The Lord's in control. We'll know by and by. All I need to do is think about serving him and living for him. Just do what's right day by day, and it'll all be good in the end. If you're saved, it'll all work out in the end. But providence. Next week, we'll get into a different part of the story where Haman's introduced. Not next week, next month. And we'll go from there. But I appreciate your attention. Thank you.